All right, Art 1, Chapter 3. This is we're continuing Chapter 3, so this is 3-3. Again, you can just ignore that date right there. So we've looked at the Renaissance briefly, and now we are looking at the 17th century, or the 1600s. And so in the 1600s, we have the Baroque period. So if Renaissance started getting more realistic, and we started seeing paintings and other artwork that is more realistic, and now the Baroque period gets even farther. It started emphasizing movement, value contrast, and filled the space. So we're just kind of getting more realistic and more like real life. Things are happening. Baroque also became more ornate. So even in the music, there was more going on. So there's more spaces being filled. Filling the space is a big part of the Baroque period. Now, on to the 18th century, or the 1700s. We've got Rococo, came from the Baroque, free, graceful, playful use of line, and delicate colors. So I'd really like to show you a bunch of examples of this stuff, but it would take a long time, and it's weird to not be in class. So we're just taking in notes. Make sure you're reading your book following the assignments in the book. Next is the 19th century, or the 1800s. Here's where things really start moving. Notice how before, it's like these past hundreds of years, we have like one style of art that we're talking about. Now in the 1800s, there are all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different kinds of art or styles that we're looking at. So we've got, in the 1800s, neoclassicism, realistic and unemotional. So it harkens back to Roman artwork, where the guys are just straight, and they're realistic, they're unemotional, they're not moving very much, they are static. Romanticism. Now here is where we have emotional scenes. Personal impression is important. So in Romanticism, it's still going to look realistic, but these scenes are more emotional, maybe romantic. It's like what might be on the cover of a steamy novel in the grocery store or something like that. Realism. This presented familiar scenes as they actually were. So a lot of times in art, the artist will make kind of a fantastic scene that's not the way things really are. In realism, the artist chooses a scene that is like a normal, everyday kind of a scene, and paints it or draws it or captures it however they do. But they do that with just regular people walking around doing their thing, whatever. Not special or not famous people, right? Well, we're all special, right? Okay, so these are just normal people, which is different than what a lot of the other art was being created. So let's keep going. Now, we have Impressionism. So we've started getting more and more realistic, and more and more like real life. Now Impressionism takes this idea of familiar scenes and everyday moments, but starts changing from not being so realistic, and started to stress the effects of sunlight and starting to be abstract. So what we're doing with Impressionism is we're not being so tied to the way something actually looks and being super realistic. So we're stressing more like the colors and the light, and it's not quite so realistic. You can see what's happening there, but it's not super realistic. Let's look at something that is 1875. So here is a painting from 1635. And so if we're looking at the 1600s, this would be considered Baroque. So this is super realistic. There is a lot going on here. But I would call this might be more like a Rococo painting. Graceful, playful use of line, delicate colors. So sometimes there's some overlap. Sometimes it's not super clear. But you can see this is quite realistic. And then we get to this painting here, which is 1875. So this is getting pretty close to Impressionism. I would call this more of realism. This is kind of an everyday kind of a situation. People playing some baseball. But you can see in the background and on the sides how washed out and how unimportant those details are. And so this would be kind of a more impressionistic type of background and a more realistic type of foreground here and in the middle. So that one kind of straddles a couple different styles as well. Then we have post-impressionism. So if Impressionism starts to abstract the real environment, Post-Impressionism really abstracts the environment. So this Cezanne here is a good example of Post-Impressionism. Notice how you can still kind of see there's a tree, there's a house, there's stuff going on, but it's very abstract. It's not realistic. But you can still see that there's stuff happening. You can still recognize shapes and see that this is a scene of some sort. Now, one of the most famous post-impressionists is Van Gogh, and his Starry Night is probably the most famous of all, and I don't even have a sample of that for you to look at. So look it up on YouTube, on the internet, Van Gogh Starry Night. That's probably the most famous post-impressionism example that there is. And that is 3-3.